Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I have a really exciting show for you tonight because I have a candidate who I've been really following very closely, and I'm very excited about her because she is a progressive millennial woman running against an establishment Democrat in the state of Washington for U.S. Congress. So right now, I am pleased to be bringing in to my show Sarah Smith. Welcome, Sarah. How are you doing tonight?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm doing fantastic. I'm very excited to be on with you tonight.
Yes, well, I've been following you, and you have so much energy and so much enthusiasm. And of course, I love your policies, and I love the way that you're campaigning. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us about yourself. Where are you from? What did you study in college? What were you doing before you decided to run for Congress? What motivated you to run for office, and how did you choose Congress? Give me the whole background.
All right. I will give you everything I can as succinctly as I can.
All right.
So I'm 30 years old. I'm a working class woman. I actually work full time on top of campaigning still. I'm fortunate enough to have an employer that is very flexible with me and lets me do this and knows what I'm doing, which is fantastic. I was born in Connecticut, and then I lived in Southern California for a little while. I moved to Everett, Washington for a little while, and then I went to college in Arizona. I attended the University of Arizona. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in classical studies, which is like Greek and Roman and Latin and all that history stuff. And then after I finished my degree, I actually applied to transfer up to Seattle, and I moved up to Seattle right after graduation. And I've always been politically involved and politically aware and politically active. I come from a politically active family. I participated in anti-war protests, sit-ins and walkouts when I was in high school. I continued to do it for a long time. And I'm actually sad to say I'm still doing it today at the age of 30. And I had that same kind of moment that everyone had in 2016 when Trump got elected and Bernie had the nomination taken away from him. And we all kind of had that moment of, oh my God, what do I do? And I am not exactly the kind of person who just waits for something to come to me. I like to go out and find something. And so I started trying to volunteer more. I started working with my local legislative district up here in Washington, and it was the 37th legislative district. I was a PCO for a brief period of time, a precinct committee officer. And I kind of decided I wanted to do more. So I started looking at other organizations I could partner up with. And Brand New Congress was actually one of them. Brand New Congress is really, really cool. They're a fantastic organization. They have been totally integral in this entire congressional run for me. They are an organization that's geared on getting people to put policy first and party second. So I've been on a slate with Republicans, independents, with other Democrats, with Democratic Socialists. There is a breadth of people that are on this slate, but the thing we all share in common are we share issues in common. And that really spoke to me. And so after a little while, I actually got a call from their director, and she said, hey, somebody in your community nominated you to run. How would you feel about that? And I went and I talked about it with my husband. I asked him what he thought, and we talked about how it could change our lives. We talked about what it would upend, what it would mean for us if we did it. And finally, he asked me, you know what, we're overcomplicating this. If the ballot were to come today, would you vote for the incumbent? And I said, well, it would depend who else is on the ballot. And he said, I'm not making this up. He looks at me and he goes, well, then you should be who else is on the ballot. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't argue with that. And so we decided to just up and take the risk and take the chance. I mean, the fact is working people need someone who's going to be a voice for them in Congress. And we've been pushed so far away from our table, we don't know who that voice is anymore. And I firmly believe in this mission. I believe in this message. I believe in this platform. I have the energy, the fortitude, and the stamina to stand up for people who need me to. So I have an obligation to stand up for those people and fight for them.
Now, when Brand New Congress was originally started, I remember they were going to try to flip the entire Congress. They wanted to turn over the entire Congress and have everybody run on one platform. And basically, because of economies of scale, they'd be able to promote their entire slate across the entire country. Were you involved in it as early as that, or did you come in at a later time?
I did start right when they were formulating the idea. So when Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats were still one organization, that's when I came on. So the very early days of the little egg that then split apart and became Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats. So I remember the split. I remember being there for the formation, talking about the mission, talking about what we were really pushing to achieve. And Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats both had the same thing happen, where we realized that we would be better suited to turn this into a marathon and not a sprint. And so making sure that we're putting forth candidates and campaigns that are important, that are on the slate, that are running the way they need to be run, and that can receive the support that they need to receive from those organizations within their scope was really, really important. And that changed the message for us. So we started focusing on how do we make this a marathon? How do we make this thing long lasting? And being a candidate, being a part of it, it has been an invaluable experience to watch an organization like that grow. It's helped shape a lot of the foundation for our attitude in the campaign on my end. It's helped forge an incredible relationship with the folks at Brand New Congress who have wound up being so integral to this whole process for me. And I think that the model of focusing on it as a marathon and not a sprint, and focusing on over time and working towards this goal is incredibly good. It's incredibly strong. It's incredibly sustainable, and it's absolutely the right move. But it's an amazing organization. They really are grassroots folks with their hearts in the right place who are prioritizing people instead of party lines.
Yeah, I was really disappointed when a lot of people started knocking Justice Democrats and the connection with Cenk and the fact that he was getting $2 million from Jeffrey Wasserman. And, you know, I did interview him a little bit at the Democratic Party, this California Democratic Party e-board meeting, and asked about the conflict of interest between his media platform and the candidates that he was supporting. But it just was kind of interesting because I remember there was also some controversy about why did they need to start Justice Democrats with the same personnel as Brand New Congress? The only difference being that Justice Democrats, you had to run in the Democratic Party, and Brand New Congress, you could be a Republican or no party preference. Can you clear up any of that? And then I want to get back to your race.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to. There was a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I remember doing a ton of interviews when all of that happened. The one thing that I want to step up and guarantee people is the folks that are really making those organizations run, they really believe in the message and the mission, and they are here because they believe in their candidates. And the reason for the split was because there were so many candidates that were coming on board, and there were so many resources coming from different directions that keeping the organizations together was messier than having them operate separately and do their own thing. Both the leadership decided that the dream was the same, so they wanted to try and partner as much as they could, but rather than choose to enmesh that partnership closer together, they chose to separate and both, maintain a coalition rather than an enmeshed partnership, if that makes sense. And it enabled Justice Democrats to go out and focus on these Democratic races. It enabled them to go out and focus on folks like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Brent Welder and James Thompson. It enabled them to go out and do that and focus their resources on those Dem-on-Dem races, which are, being in one, I can tell you, they are a whole different beast, and they really need a lot more care and a lot more attention. So separating allowed Justice Democrats to go and focus on that, while Brand New Congress allowed Brand New Congress's staff and volunteers to focus on building up that name recognition, building up those Republicans and independents and those non-party affiliated folks in a grassroots way that actually gave them real meaningful support. And it let them focus on policy. It let them focus on organizing events to get people to talk about policy over party. And it really let them hammer that message home with their candidates. And it gave them a smaller pool to work with so they could stretch that message and get it to go a lot farther. And so I think it was a really smart move to split and use their resources the way that worked better for them. I know there was a lot of controversy, but believe me, I've met the directors of both. They really do believe in the mission. Everything else aside, all the other chaos aside, they're here for the right reasons. They really are.
Yeah. Now, so did they have a specific platform, I call it the Bernie Sanders platform, that you had to sign onto in order to be a Justice Democrat? Or was there any flexibility based on your own personal beliefs and the desires of your constituency and the politics of your district for you to have flexibility in your platform?
Sure. So I like talking about how these organizations work because it's really interesting. There were really most of the platform was actually up to us. And I actually helped contribute to different parts of the platform, like the education planks were really important to me. And so we talked about those and actually got to sit in on meetings for that and help talk about the immigration platform and give feedback on the immigration platform, which was great because I, as a candidate, had an opportunity to talk about that with folks. And there were really just a few core tenets that you had to sign on to. So you had to sign on to the core tenets of no corporate money, believing in single payer healthcare, debt-free education, infrastructure bill, and everything, and immigration. And everything else was pretty much up to you. and up to your district, because those are some of the 5 biggest issues our country is facing right now. And so those are some of the 5 biggest things that it's important to have progressive values entrenched into and enmeshed into completely. So those are really it. Other than that, there was a discussion around a lot of different policy planks like gun reform and housing for all, and there were discussions around those planks, but the only ones set in stone were those 5. Everything else is really up to us.
So I noticed that you have a very strong anti-war platform on your website, which I really appreciate. And I don't think enough Democrats are focusing on that, unfortunately, even Senator Sanders, because obviously the military is very smart. The Defense Department puts bases and factories in almost every congressional district. Even Barbara Boxer, who was my senator for many years, known as one of the most progressive senators, continued to vote for war budgets. And we know how much money the military is, taking out of the total pie, unless, of course, you want to talk about modern monetary theory, in which there is no total pie. We don't have to worry about deficit spending because it's just a computer entry. But clearly, the budget that every Democrat signed, except for, I guess, Bernie Sanders most recently, was the largest defense budget in history, much more so than even what Donald Trump asked for. How did that become an important issue to you? And tell me about the other key issues in your platform.
Of course. So I have been an anti-war activist since I was in high school. And one of the key reasons for that is I was in high school when the Iraq War started under a lie, basically, that George Bush told, and that a bunch of senators and a bunch of congresspersons signed on to. And then when we found out he lied, nothing happened. There was no action taken, no attempt to impeach. There was nothing. We just said, oh, he lied, and we're going to keep fighting this war. And when I graduated from high school, my friends' decisions were, I can go to college and I can take on tens of thousands of dollars in student debt, or I can go die in a war that was predicated on the lie. And I'm still burying friends in that war, and they might not be serving, but they're coming back with struggles. They're coming back with baggage. They're coming back with darkness in them. And sometimes they don't always win. And for me, it's incredibly personal and it's incredibly heartbreaking. And I visited the VA recently here, actually in Seattle, and to walk around and to actually see what it is that war does to people and how it affects not just their bodies, but their spirits and their minds, and how no matter how people think, they're inextricably linked by this shared horror of war, I think is really visceral, and it's spiritual, and it's important, and it matters. And I think a lot of progressive candidates don't talk about it enough. And a lot of progressive candidates don't talk about foreign policy enough. And they don't talk about why it matters enough. And I become a big foreign policy nerd. I actually have I just talked with my husband today about what's going on in Somalia and Yemen, and how we're having this essential Cold War with the Saudis over control of the Gulf, over the 2 different Gulfs in the area, and how the Gulf of Oman is important and why it matters, and focusing on that area near Kuwait and talking about the petrodollar and oil. And all of this stuff links together to this message of intentional destabilization of a region over oil. People are dying. They are dying from famine. They are dying from bombings. They are dying from gunfire. There are children in buses that are being bombed, that are being killed because we're fighting for oil. And this has made this mission just so personal to me, to actually have to bury a friend because of young men die in old men's wars. This is a real thing that happens, and we're seeing people dying every single day, and we're watching money get thrown over and over again into this pit of endless war and this cycle of violence. And we've created an economy for ourselves where we rely on other people dying in order for ourselves to succeed, and that is wrong. And we have cultivated this violent economy for ourselves because we refuse to take ownership of it. And we refuse to look at any other option because there's too much money going into the military industrial complex and the pockets of oil barons for us.
Yeah, well, I just want to push back a little bit on that, because I think that oftentimes it is about oil. But the other factor is when you look at Halliburton and Bechtel and Fluor and these other companies that are construction companies and rebuilding companies, they really got made the bulk of the money for the Iraq war. Because the oil companies actually had a very good deal going with Saddam Hussein. And their whole, all their agreements, their production agreements were upset by the Iraq war. But Halliburton, Fluor, Bechtel, and those type of companies made out like bandits. So I always think there's kind of multiple causes for these different wars. But you're absolutely right that Congress people do not focus on foreign policy. And I also don't think they really have a good sense of history, because you have to understand that, like, for instance, Russia, this whole Russiagate thing, which I've been pushing back against for, 2 years now, or however long it's been that Rachel Maddow has been talking about it for the entire hour of her show every night, as opposed to issues that the people really care about. Russia has been attacked for its entire history on its western borders. And in high school, I wrote, you talk about education. I had an amazing education in high school, and I was writing college level papers, one of which was about the revisionist theory of the Cold War, which is what they sold us. Harry Truman sold us on the Cold War, and he was kind of a puppet of Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles and all the neocons of the day. And if Henry Wallace had gotten elected vice president, but they did shenanigans in the DNC that year too, they pulled a fire alarm because he was winning, and then they twisted arms overnight, and then the next morning Harry Truman won, and he was a total pawn of, I say the deep state, but people don't like me to say the deep state because that's become an alt-right term, even though I first heard it on Bill Moyer's show. Basically, we can call it the permanent government, the people that really run things in this country. So Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles basically got Truman to give the propaganda. The Russiagate of the day was that Russia wanted to take over the world. And the domino theory was the Vietnam War that I protested back in the 70s, that they wanted, that we can't let them take Vietnam, even though Vietnam was just an internal civil war. And Ho Chi Minh was a communist, but he wasn't a Russian communist. Anyway, they're doing the same thing today. They're doing the same thing with Russia. They're doing the same thing with Syria. And they always say they're gassing their own people. And that's the red line that, and then they fabricate these gas attacks. And then, of course, we have to go in there now because they're gassing their own people. And even Trump, who campaigned on a non-intervention platform. That was the one thing I liked about Steve Bannon. He wanted to get us out of the TPP, and he didn't want to be in wars for regime change. I'm sorry, I'm filibustering and I'm taking over your whole show. But
I completely get it. That's how I feel about it too. I mean, I am all about getting us out of these interventionist wars, these regime change, these puppet government prop ups. And when you actually sit down and take the time to learn about it, you learn how insidious it really is. And frankly, there are not enough progressives with foreign policy on their platform. There are not enough people in Congress talking about it, and the news is not covering it nearly enough. And as far as Russiagate goes, any kind of intervention in our election system is important and it matters. But when it comes to the lives of everyday people, we are too exhausted to find the energy to care. We are too sick, we are too tired, and we are too poor. And when you take all those things away from us, when you take our health, when you take our education, when you take our money away from us, we can't bring ourselves to keep caring about this. I keep saying it's a privilege to care about things like Russiagate. It's a privilege to care about things like climate change when you're worried about whether or not you're going to be able to eat the next day. And yet we're sitting here shoveling $5.6 trillion over 17 years into the wars in the Middle East, and there's no end in sight. And we just had Congress people approve a budget that was bigger than Donald Trump asked for. And the guy I'm running against, Adam Smith, was one of those votes. And he says that, we know I voted because it was important to get, the trans protections in there, which I completely agree with. And then he's like, but I knew they were never going to get the money. And that's when I like to tell him, of course they're going to get the money. They're going to get it from Social Security, and they're going to get it from education. We are going to find the money. We're going to employ modern monetary theory when it comes to funding that military budget. And he knows that. And he is playing dumb because he is bought and paid for by the military industrial complex to say certain things and do certain things to make it look like he has the appearance of progressivism. This is a man who is not being bought for his speech. He's being bought for his silence.
Now, are you in a urban district, a suburban district, or a rural district? Tell us about your district and the concerns of your constituents. Does this resonate with them when you talk about this? How much money is going to war that is being taken away from other programs that would benefit the people?
Of course. So my district is actually very dynamic. This is probably one of the most diverse districts in the country. We're what's called a majority minority district. So people of color are actually, they outnumber white people. And so it's a very interesting district, but we also have one of the biggest economic and income disparities in the country as well. So the district is not very big. I can drive across the whole thing, probably about 2 hours from tip to tail. And it is a completely wild ride from tip to tail. We have Bellevue and Mercer Island, which are two of the highest income, highest property value areas in the entire state. And then we also have South Seattle and Renton and Kent and Federal Way, which are not. And South Seattle and Kent in particular are very working class. They're a lot lower income. And then Renton and Federal Way and the North Port of Tacoma are more middle class, more suburban families. But the things that matter to this district, they depend on where you go. But the number one thing that matters to people in this district is corporate money and politics. And I think that's very indicative of our nation. I like to think of this district as a snapshot of what the rest of the nation looks like and thinks and feels. And every single time we're out canvassing, when people start to close their doors, when my canvassers or myself or my campaign manager goes, "Well, she's not taking corporate money," they throw the door back open and they're like, "Come again?" And every single time, no matter where we're at in the district, that's the thing that matters most. But we also see big, important things like climate change. And, you know, our higher income earners, the higher income areas are far more concerned about climate change because it's something that they're able to care about, that they have the capacity to care about. And I think it's really incredible because when we go to their doors and talk to them, these higher income folks are saying, well, it's going to hurt the people that are living in poverty the most. And I'm actually like, wow, that's amazing. But this district is so deeply connected to itself that people on different sides of the spectrum are occupied with caring about the things that each other doesn't have the capacity to care about. And so it really is an incredible district. It's a dynamic district. It's a district that knows healthcare matters. And I was just talking to one of the African media companies out here that focus on getting messages and newscasts out to immigrant communities. And they care a lot about education and education creating opportunity here. But we are such a dynamic district that it's amazing to me that we can care about things for each other when we know the other person can't. And the one knot that ties us all together is getting corporate money out of politics.
Now, when you talk about education, what's your position on charter schools? And are they as much of a threat in the state of Washington as they've become here in California?
They are absolutely a threat here in Washington. They are probably just as big a threat. And I am absolutely in favor of getting rid of charter schools. Fox News did me a great service and blasted a piece of my platform out there that says abolish charter schools. And so, yes, I do believe we need to. I also believe we need to be pragmatic and intelligent in how we do it. So I believe that we need to robustly enter some more federal funding for our federal schools. We need to build up federal funding for schools. We also need to uncouple it from test scores, and we need to uncouple it from property taxes. We need to give federal funding based on need and not on test scores, because disadvantaged kids suffer the worst and they slide down that pipeline and they never come back and they wind up behind bars. And it is a horrible path that they have to walk from there. So we need to uncouple that funding and make sure it's given to kids that need it the most. But we also have these charter schools that are trying to come in and suck up that federal funding and fill in those gaps, even though there's no kind of grading we have for them, no kind of scoring system we have for them. They don't have to perform as well as public schools. They can underperform. And there are some good ones out there. There are. But at the same time, kids should be able to go to school in any district and go to any public school and get the same quality of education and not have to worry about whether or not it's a good school. They should just know that their kid's going to get the same high quality education. And all of that renders charter schools totally useless. I don't think anybody should be making a profit with federal tax dollars off of a child's education. If taxpayers are going to pay taxpayer dollars, we should see taxpayer benefit.
Well, actually, I think it's probably state taxpayer dollars, because I don't think the federal taxes fund schools. I think they come from state taxes, and specifically property taxes. At least that's the case in California. But what's interesting is that you mentioned for-profit, and I just want to point out that that is a distinction without a difference, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, as long as they're privately managed, not accountable to a locally elected school board. They can cream students such as English language learners, special ed kids, and behavior problems back into the public schools, but then still keep the money for the rest of the whole year. And they don't have to hire unionized teachers. This happens with nonprofit charters also. So in my opinion, the teachers unions made a big mistake by not fighting them harder. Instead, they try to unionize charter teachers. And when they get union contracts, they're not as good as the public school contracts.
Yeah.
And what's happening in LA is we have a guy, Eli Broad, who I call the Betsy DeVos of Los Angeles, because he's one of those billionaires that funds charter schools and charter school candidates. They just took over the LAUSD school board. It's now a pro-charter school board. And he wants to have 50% of LAUSD kids in charters by, in the next few years. And if that happens, we're already losing $500 million a year to them. LAUSD will go bankrupt if they get 50%. So you're absolutely right. And the other problem is the test scores do not measure, if you have low test scores, it's more of a function of poverty rather than a bad school or a bad teacher. You're not being read to at night. You don't have prenatal health care. You have a trauma from walking through a gang-infested neighborhood on your way to school, whatever. It's a much more holistic solution rather than just blaming the schools and blaming the unionized teachers who have become villains. For some reason, teachers have become villains in our society. Imagine those greedy teachers asking for more money. But I digress.
I feel the same way. I get very passionate about it too. And I'm like, yeah, those greedy teachers. But I mean, it's hard to explain to people that the system is so much more broken than we think it is. And there's so much more people taking advantage of opportunity rather than people providing opportunity for everybody, even in the education system. But it's again, I use the term snapshot again, but it's a snapshot of what's happening on a macro scale around our country. Is there's an exploitable opportunity and people are exploiting it instead of choosing to close that and create a better opportunity.
Now, let's talk about your opponent, because he's what we call an establishment Democrat. I assume he's also a corporate Democrat. He takes money from various interests. Can you talk about, some of the interests that he's taken money from and how it's affected his voting? And when you point this out, do you point this out to the people when you're canvassing, and how do they react to it?
I point it out all the time, and usually a lot of them didn't realize, because we're in a very blue district. So everyone thinks, oh, we have a Democrat in office. It's a blue district. They must be a good Democrat. And I'm running against Adam Smith, who is well known for being deeply entrenched with the military industrial complex. And the problem is he's not out front in any major issue. He's not out front on climate change. He's not out front on healthcare, on immigration, on anything that matters and is immediately necessary. He's not out front on any of it. And he waits for somebody else to put forward bills. He waits for somebody else to put forward all of these different measures that they can in order to combat things like climate change, combat things like income inequality. And then he jumps on and he co-sponsors and then tries to take credit for someone else's work. So he doesn't really do anything, but then he tries to take credit because someone else did something. And the fact of the matter is, I show people all the time, Adam is the largest recipient of PAC money of all the House Democrats from our state. He receives the most. He is one of the top recipients of all the Democrats in the House right now. He receives some of the most from Puget Sound Energy, which is a fossil fuel company in the state of Washington. He also receives hundreds of thousands of dollars from Raytheon, from Northrop Grumman. He receives it from oh my gosh, what's the other company? Google. I can't remember the technical term, but he gets it from Google, gets his money from Humana Healthcare. And weirdly, he never talks about ending wars. He never talks about cutting the private spending coming out of the military budget. He never talks about eliminating those private military contracts. He never says anything about climate change except to tell me, oh, the thing that'll solve climate change is a carbon tax. And I'm like, actually, there's a lot more, but he won't sign on to those 3 pieces of legislation because he's paid a lot of money by fossil fuel industries to do it. And he won't get on board with single payer. He's signed on to Medicare for All. He signed the Summer for Progress, and he's a founding member of the Medicare for All caucus. But every time he's in front of a camera, he talks about multi-payer systems like they have in France and Germany. And I have to counter and get into the weeds and be like, actually, the way that they have the influence of corporate money in their system makes it a viable system. But the way our system is set up, it won't. What it will wind up doing, because what we have now is a multi-payer system, and what this system he proposes will end up doing is it will use government money to force people to pay their money to private insurance companies. That's all it will do. And I'm the only one on the platform that talks about single payer. So he voted for the Iraq War. He voted for the Patriot Act. He actually voted to extend it 3 times. He has continuously voted in favor of this overbloated military budget. He's never put forward any meaningful legislation for immigration reform. He's never put anything forward that means anything for fighting against climate change. He does less than the bare minimum and then jumps on somebody else's bill and says, I co-sponsored that. And then hopes no one will wonder what that means. And except I did. And I realized all it is you send an intern with a memo to the sponsor's office and they add your signature. But he has 1,000 excuses as to why he's not sponsored onto anything else. He also was in favor of the 2016 bill to continue selling cluster bombs to the Saudi Arabian government. He voted yes. And that vote was protested and hammered against him over and over again. And what it resulted in is buses and buses of dead Yemeni children and Yemeni famine and everything we knew it was going to end up in. And now he's saying he misinterpreted the bill and he misremembered the bill. After 22 years, you don't get to misremember bills and you don't get to misinterpret bills.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're really on him with a lot of specifics. One thing I learned when I took government in college, and I'm going back 40 years ago, was that Congress people exist to get reelected. They don't actually exist to do anything. And in order to get reelected, they just have to author a bill or co-sponsor a bill, as you say. They don't have to work to get it passed. They just have to be able to say, this is what I did, even though they didn't do anything. So I think it's really crucial that, you are looking at him with this kind of detail to figure out what what he does matches with what he says. So now let me ask you about the Democratic Party, because I tried to interview Tom Perez today and I was this close to interviewing him. But then I realized when he walked in with Eric Bauman, who I was fighting the entire year when he was trying to run for, California Democratic Party chair. He hates me. I hate him. Anyway,
the state Democratic Party chair doesn't like me here either. I know how you feel.
We'll talk about that in a second. As soon as he walked in with Eric Bauman, I said, oh, there goes my interview. Even though I knew the heads of all three Democratic clubs that were sponsoring that Get Out the Vote phone bank event that he was speaking at. I'm like, there goes my interview. And I was going to ask him about why he withdrew. They had a ban on fracking. The DNC, not ban on fracking, taking money from fossil fuel companies. And he reneged on that, why he said he wasn't going to endorse in a contested primary, and then he endorsed Cuomo, why he can't say he supports single payer. He keeps talking about healthcare as a right and not a privilege. I mean, I had a whole bunch of questions I was going to ask him, and I was even willing to tell the deputy communications director of the DNC what the questions were in advance, even though as a journalist, I don't need to do that, but I really wanted to give him a chance to answer him. And by not answering him, he made himself look bad, So anyway, I did a show with Cara Eastman, who is running in Nebraska, and she beat Brad Ashford, who was the DCCC endorsed candidate. And then I did a show with Levi Tilleman in Colorado, who tape recorded Steny Hoyer, the minority whip, telling him to get out of the race. So there's been a lot of hanky-panky going on with the internal, the Democratic Party supporting these corporate establishment candidates over the progressives, such as yourself. So what has been going on vis-a-vis that in your race?
A lot. So, I mean, you see it with Ben Jealous, where there are state Democrats that would rather endorse his Republican challenger than endorse a progressive. And I think that this is a clash of ideology generations, if that makes sense. So it's a clash of people that are in the Bernie Sanders generation of ideology and the clash of people that are into business as usual ideology. And I've experienced this a lot in my race because I'm challenging a 22-year establishment incumbent, and he has been in office for 22 years. He's been one of the top fundraisers for these guys. He's been one of the top contributors to the DCCC. And because it's such a safe district, anything he fundraises, he can just donate back into the DCCC and keep them going and keep them fueled. So his war chest doesn't ever have to be that big. He can just keep putting money back into them. So when I popped into the race, they realized that this district is deeply blue. This district will wake up for progressives. And they decided that they needed to find a way to stop that from happening. It has been some of the most intense, crazy things I've ever seen in my life, but they have gone so far as to find excuses not to endorse me. They have gone to great lengths to make sure that I don't get heard by the establishment. They've gone to great lengths to make sure I don't get data. So I actually have been running this whole race without access to VAN, which is the Voter Access Network.
Oh my.
Oh yeah, I have been a Democratic voter. You don't register for party here, but I am a Democratic voter and have been my entire life. And because I'm running against an establishment incumbent, they put the caveat on there that I have to have 50% plus one of the endorsements from the legislative districts. And then when they got called out on it, and they're like, well, actually, that's impossible to do when you're challenging an incumbent. The chair said, well, actually, it's because she's running with brand new Congress who endorse Republicans. And then one of those bipartisan groups endorsed my incumbent. And so one of my supporters said, well, actually, they are bipartisan too, and they endorse Republicans. So are you pulling his access? And then she basically, gymnastics her way through and said, well, because we're not technically donating to his campaign, we don't have to pull his access. But they are doing everything they can to hold on to those seats because those seats mean money. And the fact of the matter is progressives are here because we want to get stuff done. And people are ready for us to get stuff done. And they are terrified of losing power because absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I firmly believe that. Once people get a taste of power, they do not want to give it up. And progressives aren't here to hurt anybody. Progressives aren't here to injure anyone or to rip people down. Progressives are here to say, give us the baton. It is our turn to pass the legislation we want. Your way doesn't work anymore. It is time for us to be able to try it our way. And all we are asking for is we are asking for that baton so we can continue this marathon. But they're holding on to it desperately while they're trying to run farther and farther, and they're getting more and more exhausted. And we just keep standing there with our hands out saying, give us the baton. And it's going to happen one way or another. And fighting it longer and fighting it more is more exhausting and more expensive. And I think it would be in their best interest to just pass the baton, save us the trouble. If an organization needs help or is in trouble, it needs to turn inward on itself, rethink its values, and then come back stronger. We'll be a stronger, better party if we fight for stronger, better values.
Now, I mentioned that we would come back to talking about your state party. So in our state party, they have endorsements, and a lot of our progressive candidates were maybe not necessarily able to get the endorsement, but they were able to block the endorsement of the establishment candidate. What happened in that situation with your candidacy?
So there were a few legislative districts that chose not to endorse. There were a few Democratic organizations that didn't choose to endorse. The ones that did came up with some really amazing reasons to not endorse us. One of them was because I had to send a surrogate to it, and he accidentally bumped one of the buttons that opened the door, and he didn't realize it was going to be loud. And so that's why they pulled my endorsement from there. I had someone say that I didn't give detailed methods on how I was going to fund everything I was talking about. So they basically asked Fox News' how do you pay for it question. Yeah. And they said I didn't answer it when I actually had my campaign manager in the room. And they weren't going to ask me that question, but I actually forced that question. I made them ask me that question because I wanted to tell them how to fund it. And they've just been doing everything they can to find whatever reason. One of them said that I never submitted a request. Unfortunately, I keep receipts. So I forwarded them back the email chain, and they're like, oh, I guess we missed it. Oh, well. And it has been there was one of the county Democratic groups. They tried to send an old agenda, and one of them tried to trick people into thinking the date had changed for the endorsement process. It has just been the most weird, volatile, tense endorsement process I've ever seen in my life. But they have done everything they can to the point that we opened a door too loudly. And that's why they didn't give us the endorsement.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you have the endorsement of so many Our Revolution groups, so many DSA groups. And that was really the case, too, with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I happened to be in New York the night she won that tremendous upset. And I was in the Upper West Side, which was like a very short Uber ride away. And I got my butt over there. And I told Corbin, I said, give me the address. I'm coming over there. And so I live streamed the whole thing. I mean, I got there after she made her announcement, but I did get a short interview with her, and also with Zephyr Teachout and Emma Vigeland from TYT and Ryan Grimm. And yeah, and they were all there. And Corbin I met in person for the first time. And Shai Cott, who of course I know. And what was really interesting about her race, and I've seen a pattern now, the same thing with Cara Eastman, who knocked on 40,000 doors, and those two DSA candidates from Virginia that won. It seems like the only thing, as we always say, that can overcome money power is people power, and specifically face-to-face contacts with voters. So how many doors would you say you've knocked on, and all of the other organizations that are canvassing for you?
Oh boy. I would say we've probably cleared over. I actually have a much bigger win number than everybody else does because my district is dense. But I think we've probably knocked over 100,000 doors. And we have absolutely made over 100,000 phone calls, and we've sent over 150,000 text messages. We have been everywhere. We have been in every community. If I can't go, I send surrogates. DSA has just been absolutely critical in that process. And the thing that I keep telling people is, yes, we might not be the most well-funded campaign, but at the end of the day, dollars can't vote, people do. And so doing all this work and being out there, it's pouring with rain and we still go out and we canvass. We have campaign ponchos that people wear. But we make sure that we equip everyone in every possible way we can to get out there and knock doors and talk to their neighbors. If I have a spare afternoon, I'm like, cool, give me a bag. I'm going canvassing. But we've made sure that everything we do leads to canvassing. Everything we do converts people to door knockers. Everything we do gets people who are excited, even if they just want to walk their block and talk to their neighbors. Everything we do has been about getting to people's neighbors and getting in front of people. And I have a steep mountain. I have so many more people that I have to get vote for me than either Alex or Kara did. I think combined, I have to get more people than they did, which is incredible, the amount of folks there are here in Washington that are politically active, educated, and registered to vote. But we are doing the work. And I believe that that's how you win. You do the work. You meet people where they're at. People are at home. People are at their doors. People are on their cell phones. Meet them where they are. And the number one way we can get to people, especially because sometimes in Washington, people do the thing I do where someone will knock on your door and you just kind of freeze for a second. You wait and see if it's really important and they knock again. But the best way to overcome that is text them. And text banking has been really important to us, and our social media presence has been everywhere. There's only a handful of precincts that we haven't been able to touch yet, but we are fixing that. We have a couple of folks that have been able to come and do full-time volunteer canvassing for us for like a week and a half until election day. So they're like, give me a precinct, I'm going to go. But everyone here is eager, and we're passionate, and we're excited, and we've given people a place to be a part of something. And every time I run a canvassing or every time I run a volunteer orientation, I say the same thing. The world around us is quite literally on fire. We have to have a moment of joy that we can hold on to and say, that's what I'm fighting for. I am fighting to feel that moment of joy all the time. And so when we tell people that, I don't give people scripts. I let people go out and talk and speak to the things that matter to them, because that's how they find that joy. That's how they find that moment in themselves to share that love of this campaign with other people. And that's really been powerful and resonating with folks. And we've gotten creative. We hang out on the link and we give out cards about the campaign. We catch people that are commuting. We hang out at farmers markets, at grocery stores. We are everywhere. And we are meeting people on the streets. We are meeting people where they are, because the only way you empower people is you give them to be something empowered about.
Right. Now, let me ask you if you got the national endorsement of Our Revolution, because with that, I understand, comes their email list. They'll send an email to all the Bernie voters in your district. They'll send an email. They'll give you Hustle or Relay or whatever it's called now, the text banking, the text numbers of all the Bernie people in the district. Have they endorsed you, and are they helping you?
Yes. So I have gotten the Our Revolution national endorsement. They have been amazing. My favorite thing is when I'm hanging out with volunteers and we know that they're doing text banking, because someone will get a text and they'll say, hey, are you going to vote for Sarah Smith? We like to send them back a selfie of us together. But it's been really, really empowering. And it's one of those little ways you engage people to be excited. They're like, who am I texting? Sarah could be with this person right now. But I'm sure someone has a collage of like selfies of me with other people they've been texting. But it's been really amazing. And Our Revolution really is a powerhouse organization. They really are about getting in the weeds and empowering folks and doing the work. And, take a minute to read those text messages, because it really is another person on the other end. And I think it's really important to even just text back and acknowledge.
Yeah, I do it. I text back to them. They'll say, we want to do it. I'm like, No, but I had her on my show.
Yes, I do that too. I'm like, oh, I can't make it to the Planned Parenthood rally, but thank you so much. I'll send 2 friends. And I try to text people and get them to go instead. And like, it's just a nice way to acknowledge that there is a human being out there is putting their soul into making something happen. And I think that that's really beautiful. And, you know, yes, Donald Trump is president and everything is awful, but it's beautiful that people are stepping up and that people are fighting and that people are doing something and they're finding how they fit into this horribly shaped puzzle. And they're finding that moment in themselves to challenge themselves and do things they've never done before and talk to people they've never talked to before. And yes, it sucks that it was born out of all of that grief, but it is a beautiful thing that has been born out of that grief. And I believe that's what's going to propel us forward into the future.
Now, has there been any polling done in your race?
No, there's an internal poll that was done by my incumbent way back in July, and we only know this because we watched his FEC filings like a hawk. But there was polling done back in July, and so my understanding is the election did not pan out the way that the polls suggested, which really scared his team because he's actually spending more on this race than he has ever spent on any election ever, and he took the seat 22 years ago. Wow. So even when it was redistricted, he is still spending more money on this race than he did then.
Now, has he made the same mistake as Joe Crowley, which is basically not interacting with his voters, or is he out there hustling like you are?
You know, I'm going to give the man credit where credit is due. He has everything I've said yes to, he has said yes to. And last week it led to us doing a forum every other day. But he has shown up when I show up, and I do appreciate that. And I do see his signs out there. I think that's good. I know he has canvassers. We may or may not have poached one of his canvassers, but it's been great. And you know, it's this little competitive razzing, and we're trying to keep it above board. And we all know that we're all doing what we got to do. We're fighting the revolution on the side that we believe is right. And so we're always polite and we're always pleasant. And every time I see his staff, I always say hello, and I know most of them by name, and I wave at them across rooms, even though they're kind of like, but it's just, you know, be nice to people. You never know, right? And so we do see him out there. And he's got a couple of TV commercials done. So credit where it's due. For 22 years, he's trying to hustle with me, even if it's definitely a difficult pace to keep up at.
All right. Well, we reached the end of our time. Is there anything that you want to talk about that you haven't had a chance to talk about? I've been putting up your Twitter handle, but I don't know if you prefer I put your website if you want people to, you know, donate or volunteer to do text banking and phone banking in these last couple of weeks. Is there a website you want me to put up or?
Yes. So votesarahsmith.com is my website. You can find volunteer resources. You can phone bank at votesarahsmith.com/call. You can donate at votesarahsmith.com/donate. You can get involved. You can sign up to volunteer there. You can check out, we have 23 pages of policy and platform. So I actually have probably one of the most comprehensive ones of any race, but it's awesome. So please check it out. We put a lot of work into it. But the one thing I want to tell people is something that I don't think gets said enough. I came into this as a working class woman who I did 9 years at call centers. I worked my tail off. I worked with negotiating claims. I worked in bankruptcy. I worked in mortgage foreclosure. I work as a tax research assistant now. I managed a mechanic garage. I've done all these things. And, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she was a waitress. She worked in the restaurant industry. We are all coming out of these backgrounds where we're told we're not worthy, where we didn't come from the dynasty. We don't have the grooming. We didn't start a nonprofit or solve world hunger. And we're told that this invalidates our experience. But the thing I want people to take away and remember is nothing invalidates your experience. Your experience living and going through what you've gone through and enduring what you've endured, it matters. And more important than that, if you want to run for office, that experience makes you worthy of running for office. And everyone is going to try to tell you you're not. And I will never be one of those people. So if you are somebody out there who is thinking, oh, I don't know if I can run for office, but I really want to, you can and you should. So you must, because you are worthy. Whether it's school board, whether it's city council, whether it's state legislature or federal Congress, you are worthy of fighting for the people around you. You are worthy of fighting for your communities. Do not be afraid to step up and take your story and share it with the world and talk about how it matters and why it matters, because it matters. So please, if you're thinking about running, step up and run. I trust you. I believe in you. Put your heart in the right place and fight for your neighbors. That's the one last thing I'm going to leave you on.
Well, that's great. It was such a pleasure meeting you in person. You're just as fabulous as I thought you were. And I wish you all the luck. And I want to thank you for being on my show.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to tell the viewers about my next show, which is going to be Sunday night. I'm going to be interviewing Chris Peterson, who is a delegate for Bernie Sanders from the state of Iowa, and Sonia Ears. And the two of them have been going around the country to talk about how factory farming has destroyed the heartland of our country. Not only has it put so many small family farmers out of business, but it is also destroying the environment with these CAFO-style farms. And now the Chinese are taking over these CAFOs and making things even more bad. So we're going to be talking about that on Sunday night. So if this is the first time that you've seen my show, please follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, Lauren_Steiner, subscribe to me on YouTube, Lauren from LA. And until I see you next, keep fighting.